My name's Miranda Seymour and I live at Thrumpton Hall in Nottinghamshire. And my family have lived here for over 400 years through a rather tortuous route of ancestry. But really key to the Byron connection are two figures, John Emerton and the 10th Lord Byron, who was my great uncle. So that's how I came to be here. But the reason that I'm so attached to Byron and feel such a closeness to him is partly through living in a house which has lots of Byron connections, partly through being a biographer of 19th century women, actually, and the figure who particularly interests me is Lady Byron, who I thought had been given a very tough time by history, and his extraordinary daughter Ada Lovelace, who actually visited this house to go and see Newstead in 1850. So I would like to explain a little bit of why there is such a strong connection between Thrumpton, where I am, and Newstead, which is about 20 minutes drive away and was probably only half an hour's drive in the days of Colonel Wildman and John Emerton, living here as a bachelor, with £70,000 of his own to spend on revamping this beautiful house. One of the things that really strikes people who come to Thrumpton is what's called the Byron Oak, for good reason, because this oak was bought here, it would seem, by Wildman as a gift to his friend John Emerton and planted in the garden here. And ever since then, it has thrived. But very movingly to me, when Byron's daughter, who of course he'd never really seen because he left England when she was only 2 months old, he was very interested in hearing about her and always asking, how's Ada and what's she doing and does she like me? Does she like poetry? Do hope she doesn't. Quite enough to have just one poet in the family, he said. So Ada, rather going against her mother's wishes, came here with her husband, Lord Lovelace, in 1850, en route to visit the Wildmans at Newstead. And when Ada came here, we have a record of her seeing the Byron Oak and also loving the daffodils. And the daffodils are still here, and it's rather lovely to think of Ada in her visit, wandering by the lake and looking at them. Of course, it's thanks to Ada and to her cousinship here that we have so many Byron relics here. And the history of the Byron connection here is really quite fascinating. John Emerton had a niece who became his heir. He didn't have any children of his own. And his niece, Lucy Westcombe, you can see in this little picture here. So here's Lucy, here's her sister Mary, there's her sister Kitty. And in 1839, after Mr. Emerton died, all these three girls came to live at Thrumpton with their mother, who was, it must be said, Byron mad. 1824 was when Byron died. About 16 years after his death, there was actually a kind of tour of Europe which would be Byron focused. And I was fascinated to find that these three little girls went off with their mother on a Byron tour to see Villa Diodati and Geneva and Genoa. And who did they go with? They went with their neighbours and friends, the Byron boys. But when they got to the Villa Diodati, so little Mary wrote with disgust in the journal she kept, the Byron boys went off gambling in Geneva. The three young sisters were all reverently going with their mother to look at the Villa Diodati. But anyway, the happy end of that little outing is that Lucy and her sister Mary married the two Byron brothers. So when Lucy actually came to live at Thrumpton as the owner, she lived here until 1912, her husband was Captain Byron, Ada's favourite cousin, seen by as her brother, who later became the 8th Lord Byron. And Mary married the 9th Lord Byron. And like the 10th Lord Byron, my great-uncle, they all lived at Thrumpton. One of my favourite things in this cabinet was something that Byron himself adored, which was Byron's narrative. This is the narrative of John Byron, and it contains an account of the great distresses suffered by himself and his companions off the coasts of Patagonia. Now, this was the famous wreck of the Wager, which is now being made into a film by Martin Scorsese, which I personally can't wait to see. And Byron, while he was not a great sailor himself, was fascinated by his great-uncle's exploits and apparently drew on them heavily when he was writing Don Juan. Many of the incidents which overtake poor Juan, including the eating of his pet dog and some of the sailors, are taken directly from this journal. They did actually happen. And I'm not sure if the camera can catch this at all, but I'll tell you the story of it. This tiny little ring, especially for those of you who are visiting Newstead and have seen the absolutely enormous rings that went on Byron's fingers in one of his swollen periods. His weight ballooned and shrank throughout his life. He definitely had some kind of medical condition. But this little ring dates from when Byron and his mother were living up in Aberdeen, and he first heard that he had inherited the title. Byron was evidently absolutely thrilled to become Lord Byron. Well, what little boy living in some poverty up in Aberdeen would not be? Suddenly he's got a title, he's got a Gothic abbey, he's got power, and what does he do? He goes off and has this little ring made for himself, and on it, it has those famous words which women learned never to trust, which were the Byron motto, Crede Byron, believe in Byron. Well, if you were a woman, you might think twice about that. And I wear this on my finger with joy and pride every day.